Welcome to Talk It Off Nightmares, Episode 1. Today I'll be reading a short submission titled Peacefully Empty. Before I get into my story, I have to tell you, I was raised pretty sheltered and felt very entitled. I tell you this so you might understand some of the decisions I made during this life-changing event. I was 17, rebellious, and thought I knew best. Amy, a girl I met in camp over the summer, invited me to a party at one of her friends' houses. It was going to have boys and liquid encouragement, so it was definitely something my parents would never let me go to. Also, it was 45 minutes away. I lived in Birmingham, a suburb of Michigan. It's not as upscale as it is now, but in the early 90s, it was still a safe neighborhood. It was a Saturday night and my parents were hosting a block party. Everyone was chatting it up around the fire pit in my backyard. During these events, my father would move our vehicles from our garage out to the street to make room for our foosball and ping pong tables, just in case any party goers wanted to get into a game. So while my family entertained, it was easy for me to slip out and take a car. I had directions written down, no cell phone or GPS at the time. All I had was this poorly written piece of paper that I made in a rush on a phone call with Amy. I was so excited about going out that I didn't even look down at what I was writing. As you can probably guess, I got lost. On and off freeways, through suburbs and city streets, I was completely turned around and running out of gas. Not knowing how to get back home, nor to the party, I exited the freeway again and drove for a bit, hoping to find a gas station or a convenience store so I could use their phone. I started to get worried when I stopped seeing functional streetlights. All around, there were abandoned, decrepit homes and small businesses. This freaked me out, so I sped up to get through that part of town. The further I got, the deeper in the darkness I ended up. It was almost pitch black out except for my headlights. Every once in a while, I would pass a garbage can or one of those metal bins on fire next to an abandoned house or building with a few people standing around it to stay warm. I was a sheltered girl from the suburbs, and this was a lifestyle and people I really only saw in the movies or on cops. I was scared out of my mind. I started to pray out loud for Jesus to help me, and at that moment, the car ran out of gas. I was dead in the water. I started panicking, shaking, and getting short of breath. I focused on controlling my breathing until I was as calm as I could possibly be in that situation, and began to scan my surroundings. To my left were two rundown houses, boards on windows, and one had half the roof missing. On my right was another car, but the tires and doors were missing. Behind me was an empty lot that seemed to go on forever with auspicious shapes sprinkled throughout that I couldn't make out in the dark. My first thought at the time was to find a payphone and convince the operator to give me a free call because I was a stranded kid. That thought died almost instantly because I realized I was not brave enough to wander this neighborhood. My second thought was to just stay put in the car until morning, but then it occurred to me that I hadn't seen a car for blocks that hadn't been stripped down to the studs. It was a damned if I do, damned if I don't situation, so I decided to go with option 2 and stay put in the car. It started to get really cold, and I knew my mother kept an emergency coat in the trunk. It was pitch black behind my car, so I put on the brake lights to see if the coast was clear. Utter terror ran through every inch of my body. I saw a figure approaching the vehicle. I took my foot off the brakes, slid down in my seat, and curled up into a ball. A few seconds passed when I noticed a light dance around my body and then a tap on the passenger side window. I jumped out of my skin. I thought for sure I was going to die until I heard a kind voice. "Oh no, sweetie, you shouldn't be here. I'm so sorry, sweetie." I looked up and made eye contact. He looked to be about mid-60s, scruff on his face, and wearing a tattered, oversized beanie. He had eyes and a concerned look on his face. All I could do was stare at him as he spoke. "I'm sorry, sweetie, but this is where they took my boy." His face grimaced in pain with those words. "He was a good one, my boy, that's for sure. I'm so sorry, sweetie, but this is the time and the place. I'm so sorry," he said. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to be sorry, but I was still in shock. He continued, "Now close your eyes and plug your ears, sweetie, okay?" I did as I was told. Even with my ears covered, I heard a loud pop and a moment later a thud on the ground. I knew what happened. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. My chest hurt from how hard my heart was beating, and then lights out. I came to when it was morning, I believe, but I couldn't be sure a passing vehicle woke me up. I was freezing. I looked outside, making sure not to look down out my passenger side window. In the daylight, the rundown neighborhood did not look even half as scary as it had the night before. I gathered my nerves to get out of the car to find a phone. I walked to the trunk to get my mother's coat, still refusing to look down. I opened the trunk and got the coat, but I believe curiosity got the best of me, and when I closed the trunk, my eyes were fixed on the ground next to the passenger side door. It really happened. That was the moment that the little sheltered girl in me died. A heavy, sick feeling washed over me, followed by a numbness that to this day has never truly gone away. He was just lying there, peacefully empty. I stood and stared for a moment and then began walking down the street. All the fear from the night before was gone. I was just a thing moving in a direction to get to a phone. I didn't run or make haste in any way. I just walked and took in the sights. I saw a few people on my stroll, a few talking to themselves, a few staring at me like I just insulted their mom, so I just kept going until I found an old-looking car repair shop that was open. I went inside. There was an older gentleman behind the counter. I told him what happened and that he needed to call the police. He didn't seem shocked at all from my short story, but what he did next brought me to tears. "I'm sorry, sweetie," he said with a sad and concerned look on his face. I grabbed his hand. This time I was going to speak. I begged him through my tears and snot-covered face, "Please, don't be sorry." He nodded with even more of a concerned look on his face and then made the call. The police came, at least 5 cars. One stayed with me and the shop owner while the others investigated the scene. My parents arrived to pick me up and retrieve the car just as the police returned. They told my father that there was no one injured by our car and that the person I saw was probably a drunk that had passed out, woken up, and walked it off. They said they are going to chalk it up to a joyride that went south, but it could have been worse. We got a police escort to our car and they waited there as my dad put gas in it. I noticed by the passenger side of the car there was a large amount of water, and it trailed to the front of our car, up the sidewalk, and into one of the abandoned houses. I knew they'd found him. Maybe it was going to be too much paperwork. To this day, I believe they dragged him into that abandoned house to rot and then cleaned up the scene. My mother drove in the car I had my little joyride in, so my father had me alone for the journey home. He screamed, yelled, and threatened me with all kinds of punishment, but I wasn't there. Just my physical form was. I was never the same after that. Like the stranger I met that night in my youth, I am forevermore peacefully empty.